Why did God need to raise judges? The story few know. Before we dive into the incredible story of how the people of Israel lived through victories and defeats, challenges and deliverances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. If you love learning more about the Bible and exploring each chapter in depth, this is the perfect place for you. So, subscribe now, give it a like, and get ready for a journey through the book of Judges that will amaze you. The author of this book is traditionally attributed to Samuel. Imagine a people who received the promised land, saw miracles with their own eyes, and still forgot about God. The book of Judges is not just a sequence of ancient stories. It is a dark portrait of what happens when a nation abandons its faith. Here, there are no kings, there is no stability, only a constant cycle of downfall, suffering, and divine mercy. You will meet the unlikely heroes that God raised up, like Deborah, Gideon, and Samson, and discover why this book is one of the most intense, chaotic, and surprising in the entire Bible. Get ready. This is a journey of human error, and the faithfulness of a God who never gives up on his people. 1. The death of Joshua and the spiritual decline of Israel. Chapters 1 and 2. The silence after Joshua. When Joshua died, the people of Israel found themselves facing a new world. They were finally in the promised land, but now without their great leader. Joshua, God's chosen warrior, had led Israel with firmness and faith. Under his leadership, the walls of Jericho fell, kings were defeated, and the promise made to Abraham began to be fulfilled. But all that was left behind, and the silence of his absence began to echo among the tribes. Little by little, the people who had marched together began to disperse. Each tribe went its own way, facing its own enemies. Some kept fighting, others made agreements, and others simply stopped fighting. And that's when everything began to fall apart. The people began to settle down. The promised land was already within their reach, so why keep fighting? Why follow the strict orders given by Moses and Joshua? They began to live among the Canaanites, accepting their gods, their customs, their festivals, their idols. And so, little by little, they forgot who had brought them out of Egypt. The Bible says that a new generation arose. A generation that did not know the Lord, nor did they remember the works he had done for their ancestors. They knew they were in Canaan, but they did not know why. They did not know who had brought them there. And when people forget who God is, chaos takes over. That's what happened. Israel sank into idolatry. They began to worship Baal, the Asherah, and to participate in pagan rituals. God, seeing this, withdrew his protection. And the enemies came. Neighboring peoples rose up and began to oppress Israel, invading, plundering, enslaving. The people cried, suffered, and were in anguish. And when there was no way out, they remembered God. They cried out to him. They asked for help. And then, with mercy, God raised someone up. A judge. A liberator. An unlikely hero who led the people to victory. But, soon after the peace, they returned to their error, and it all started again. This is how the book of Judges begins. Not with glory, but with oblivion. Not with faith, but with decadence. A story that teaches us that it is not enough to conquer promises. We must remain faithful to the God who promised them. 2. The cycle of Judges. Chapter 2. The cycle of broken faith. The cycle began, and it soon became clear. The people of Israel were living in a spiral of ups and downs. Every time they turned away from God, something terrible happened. But divine mercy was always there, ready to rescue them. Israel turned away. Darkness began to cover the land. Then, oppression arose. Enemies emerged from neighboring lands, stronger, more cruel, like an implacable wave. And in the face of pain, suffering, and loss, the people cried out, "God, help us! Raise someone to save us." And, as an answer to the sincere cry of his children, God always heard. He raised up a judge. Not a king, but a courageous and unlikely leader. A judge who often did not see himself as the chosen one, but who, moved by faith, made the impossible happen. Then the people gathered together. Victory came, peace returned. But soon, Israel returned to error. They looked at their conquests, at the land they possessed, and forgot about God again. And the cycle began again. This cycle repeated itself almost mechanically. Disobedience, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. And so it continued. The people of Israel would turn away, be oppressed, cry out for help, and God would raise up a deliverer. The cycle seemed endless. With each liberation, the people seemed more grateful, more faithful, but their faithfulness was always short-lived. As if the time of peace were an invitation to forget God again. The story of Judges is, in fact, the story of a people who experience God's mercy, but struggle to remain faithful. A people who are rescued, but in their freedom, are lost. And this cycle, dear friends, is not something that happened in the past, in the history of Israel. Many times we too, like the people of Israel, live in cycles. Cycles of obedience and disobedience. Times when we are so close to God, but when things are going well, we forget our dependence. But the good news is that, just like with Israel, God's mercy never runs out. Are you enjoying this journey through the challenges and victories of the people of Israel? If so, don't forget to like and share this video with someone who will also benefit from this message. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take the opportunity to do so now, so you don't miss any content about the Bible. Each new video is an opportunity to grow in faith, and you won't want to miss it. 3. Main judges and their stories. The unlikely heroes, judges of Israel. Each judge that God raised was a surprise. They were not leaders of noble birth, nor glorious warriors. They were ordinary people, with flaws, fears, and insecurities. But through them, God showed his strength, transforming weaknesses into victories. Othniel, chapter 3. The first judge, was chosen by God to free Israel from the oppression of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram. He was an ordinary man from the tribe of Judah, without any great achievements before that. But God used him to give Israel 40 years of peace. However, after his death, the people turned away from God again, and the cycle began again. And then Ehud, chapter 3, appears, an unlikely man at first sight. A man with a disability in his right hand, who would become the liberator of Israel. He approached King Eglon, an obese and cruel man, and cunningly, using a hidden sword, killed him. The people of Israel were freed, but once again, peace was brief. Then God raised up Deborah, chapter 4, a female leader, prophetess, and judge. At a time when women were not seen as leaders, God chose her to lead Israel. She called the commander Barak to face the armies of Gideon, the king of Canaan. With Deborah's leadership, Israel won a great victory. But this victory did not last forever. When Deborah died, the people fell back into error. And the cycle repeated itself. And God continued to raise up unlikely heroes. Like Gideon, chapter 6. A humble man from the tribe of Manasseh, who considered himself the least of his family. When the angel of God found him, he was hiding, trying to protect some of the wheat. But God called him, and empowered him to lead Israel against the Midianites, a people who had oppressed Israel for years. With only 300 men, Gideon defeated an immense army, demonstrating that it was not numbers or human strength that brought victory, but trust in God. Jephthah, chapter 11. Another unlikely judge, was the son of a prostitute. Despite being rejected by his own family, Jephthah was called to save Israel from the Ammonites. He defeated his enemies, but made an ill-considered vow that cost him dearly. He sacrificed his own daughter, whom he had promised to God in exchange for victory. The pain of his promise reminds us that our words and vows to God are serious. And finally, the last great judge, Samson, chapter 13, known for his supernatural strength. Samson, however, was a mixture of strength and weakness. He possessed impressive strength, given by God, but he was also an impulsive man, driven by his passion. With Samson, Israel had victories over the Philistines, but his personal life was marked by mistakes, such as his relationship with Delilah, who betrayed him. Even so, in the end, God used his death to defeat the Philistines once and for all, showing that God can work even in the darkest situations. Each of these judges was a response to Israel's misery, but also a reflection of human weaknesses. The people of Israel were not saved by perfect heroes, but by people who, with their defects and flaws, were used by God to fulfill His purposes. What does God teach us from this? That He does not need perfection to act. He uses flawed and ordinary people, like you and me, to accomplish His plans. When we surrender ourselves to Him, He empowers us, not by our strength, but by His grace. The judges of Israel were unlikely heroes, but they were used in incredible ways by a God who never leaves His people helpless. And even when it seems that all is lost, God always raises an answer, a solution, a way of deliverance, always. 4. Moral and religious decadence in Israel, chapters 17 to 21. The decadence of Israel, the end of the cycle. As the cycle of judges repeated itself, the people of Israel, in their ingratitude, began to distance themselves further and further from God. Each time a judge died, the memory of God weakened, and the people returned to following their own ways. But just as peace seemed to be finally being achieved, something darker began to take shape in the heart of Israel. What began as small lapses from faith turned into a deep decline. The lack of consistent leadership caused Israel to spiral into corrupt morality. The land that was supposed to be holy, set apart for God, became a place of idolatry and confusion. Towards the end of the book, we see the story of Micah, a man from the tribe of Ephraim who, in his search for something more, sets up an idol in his home and consecrates a Levite to be his personal priest. This act of false worship not only reflects the corruption of an individual, but also reveals the spiritual state of Israel. They were so far from God that they no longer knew how to worship Him properly. The religious system itself was being corrupted. This story culminates in a civil war against the tribe of Benjamin after a Levite and his concubine are brutally attacked by men from the town of Gibeah in Benjamin. The sin of a small town leads to a national tragedy. The revenge and destruction of the Benjamites, a brotherly people, brings to Israel a bitter realization of how far they have come. The people of Israel find themselves divided, destroyed, and in a state of great confusion, not knowing how to restore themselves. The book ends with a powerful and devastating sentence. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Judges, chapter 21, verse 25. Israel was without a solid leader, and as a result, anarchy spread. Each person did as he pleased, without any moral guide, without God's direction. The decadence was total. Sin took over every aspect of society. Religion, morality, justice. There was no longer a standard of holiness. The moral decadence in Israel was, in fact, the consequence of their turning away from God. The lack of a king was not just a political problem, but a spiritual absence. They were lost, without direction, without focus. And as often happens in our own lives, when we do not have firm and faithful leadership from God, chaos takes over. But even in the midst of this decline, we can see a reflection of our own journey. How many times in our lives, without God's guidance, have we made decisions based on what seems right to us, and ended up distancing ourselves from the truth and peace that He offers? How many times has our society, without solid principles, found itself plunged into crisis and confusion? The end of the book of Judges gives us a warning. Without God, everything can be lost. Even the promised land, this place of blessing and promise, can become a land of ruin if we stray from God's presence. But in the midst of decline, there is always hope. The people of Israel, although marked by their mistakes, were still God's chosen people. And although at the end of the book the chaos seemed to be total, we know that God would not abandon them. The story of Israel would continue, and God would once again raise up a king, the great king, David, who would unite the people and bring hope for a better future. In this book we learn some valuable lessons. Without faithful leadership, God's people easily become corrupt. God is merciful and raises up deliverers, even when the people do not deserve it. Obedience to God is vital for peace and prosperity, and moral decay leads to social destruction. If this story of faith, failure, and deliverance touched your heart, leave a comment below. I would love to hear what you learned from the book of Judges. And remember, here on the channel, we are always exploring more powerful lessons from the Bible to apply in our daily lives. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't miss the next videos. May God bless you, and until the next video.